You think you have a plan. You've watched the videos. You've read the forums. Maybe you've even bought some gear. And right now, in this exact moment, you believe that when collapse comes, you'll know what to do. You won't. Because the plan you have, the one everyone has, is built on a foundation that doesn't exist. It assumes things will break slowly. It assumes you'll have time. It assumes the grocery store will empty over days, not hours. It assumes people will stay calm long enough for you to make decisions. Here's what the data actually shows. In every modern supply disruption, every natural disaster that cut off resources for more than 48 hours, every scenario where systems stopped working and didn't come back, people didn't behave the way you think they will. They didn't behave the way they think they will. And that gap between expectation and reality is where your plan falls apart. This isn't about gear. It's not about whether you have enough water or the right kind of flashlight. The fatal flaw in your survival plan is that it's based on a version of collapse that has never happened. Not once. Not in any historical record. You're preparing for a movie. And movies aren't real. Let me show you what is real. In 2017, Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico. Total infrastructure collapse. No power, no water distribution. Supply chains severed. And here's the thing nobody talks about. It wasn't the hurricane that killed most people. It was the 72 hours after. The government said help was coming. People waited. They stayed in their homes because that's what you're supposed to do, right? Wait for official instructions. Follow the plan. 4,000 people died. Most of them died waiting. Now look at the pandemic supply shocks in 2020. Toilet paper, basic hygiene products, food staples. These weren't even collapse scenarios. These were minor disruptions with full government function, operational hospitals, and working infrastructure. And within 6 hours of the first panic buying reports going viral, stores were empty. Not because there wasn't enough. Because distribution assumes steady demand, the system has no shock absorption. It's built for efficiency, not resilience. You want to know the fatal flaw? You're planning for a collapse that gives you warning signs. You're planning for rationality. You're planning for other people to be slower than you. They won't be. The average American household has 3 days of food. Not 3 weeks, 3 days. And that's if they don't panic. If they do panic, it's less than 24 hours before they're making decisions you can't predict. The suburbs you think are safe? They're 48 hours from chaos the moment grocery stores stop restocking. Because nobody in those houses knows how to produce anything. They know how to consume. And when consumption stops, proximity becomes a problem. You've been taught that survival is about having the right stuff. A bug-out bag, a water filter, freeze-dried meals. And sure, those things matter, but they matter fifth, maybe sixth. What matters first is understanding that the collapse you're imagining, the slow, visible, predictable breakdown, doesn't exist outside of fiction. Real collapse is fast. It's invisible until it isn't. And by the time you see it, the window is already closing. Look at Venezuela. 2015 to 2019, hyperinflation, government dysfunction, supply chain death spiral. You know what the survivors say about the first month? They say they didn't believe it was real. They saw the lines forming. They saw prices doubling every week. They saw the shelves getting thinner. And they told themselves it would stabilize. Because that's what people do. They normalize. They wait for someone to fix it. The ones who survived weren't the ones with the most gear. They were the ones who understood the psychology of crowds and moved before the crowd did. They knew that in collapse, timing is the only currency that matters. You can have a year's worth of supplies, but if you're still in the city when the riots start, you've already lost. This is the part nobody tells you. Your survival plan isn't a checklist, it's a read on human behavior under pressure. And most of you are reading it wrong. Here's the framework you need. 3 failures, 3 timelines, and 1 decision that determines everything. First failure, you think you'll recognize collapse when it happens. You won't, because collapse doesn't announce itself. It creeps. It wears the mask of temporary disruption. A supply chain delay, a grid failure that gets fixed in a day. A political crisis that everyone says will blow over. You're waiting for the obvious signal, and by the time it's obvious, half the population is waiting with you. The people who survive are the ones who treat every disruption like it might not resolve. They don't need certainty to act. They need possibility, and they move on possibility while you're still Googling whether it's real. Second failure, you think you have more time than you do. In Hurricane Katrina, the window to evacuate New Orleans safely was 18 hours. After that, the highways were parking lots. After that, you were trapped with everyone else. In the 2011 Fukushima disaster, the evacuation window was 12 hours before roads became impassable. People who left in the first 6 hours got out clean. People who waited for official confirmation got stuck in traffic for 16 hours with no fuel and no food. You don't get days. You get hours, and you'll waste most of them convincing yourself it's not that bad yet. Third failure, you think your plan works in isolation. It doesn't. Because your plan intersects with 3 million other people's plans, and their panic becomes your environment. You can have the best route out of the city, but if everyone else has the same route, it's not a route anymore. It's a choke point. You can have supplies, but if your neighbor knows you have supplies and his kids are hungry, your supplies are now a negotiation you didn't plan for. Survival isn't individual, it's statistical. And the statistics say that most people don't make it because they optimize for the wrong variables. So here's the question you actually need to answer. Are you planning for survival or are you planning to feel prepared? Because those are two different things. One keeps you alive. The other keeps you comfortable until it doesn't. If you're still watching this, drop a comment. Tell me what your plan actually is. And if you don't have one, say that too. Because the first step isn't gear, it's honesty. Subscribe if you want the rest of this breakdown, because what comes next is worse. Now let's talk about the timer you don't know is running. You think collapse is binary. One day everything works, the next day it doesn't. That's not how it happens. Collapse is a cascade. And the cascade starts long before you notice. By the time the grocery stores are empty, the cascade has been running for weeks. You just weren't paying attention. Here's how it actually works. Supply chains are networks. They depend on thousands of interdependent systems functioning simultaneously. Fuel distribution, payment processing, logistics software, trucking schedules, warehouse inventory algorithms. And every single one of those systems has a failure threshold. When one system drops below that threshold, it creates stress on the others. When multiple systems hit their thresholds at the same time, the network doesn't degrade gracefully, it collapses. In 2021, the Colonial Pipeline hack shut down fuel distribution to the entire southeastern United States. The pipeline was offline for 6 days. 6 days! And within 48 hours, gas stations across 5 states were empty. Not because there was no fuel, because the distribution system couldn't adapt fast enough to reroute supply. People panicked. They filled every container they had. They created a run on a resource that wasn't even scarce yet. That's a cascade. And it's not predictable from the outside. You don't see it coming because the systems that are failing are invisible to you. You only see the outcome, and by the time you see the outcome, you're already inside the cascade. Here's the clock you're not tracking. The average American city has a 3-day buffer of food in its distribution system. That's not 3 days of food per person, that's 3 days of total system inventory. Warehouses, trucks in transit, store shelves combined. If deliveries stop, the system empties in 72 hours under normal demand. Under panic demand, it's less than 24. You think you'll see it coming because you'll check the news. By the time they're reporting on empty shelves, the shelves have been empty for hours. By the time they're telling you to stay calm, calm is already gone. The survivors in every collapse scenario share one trait. They moved early. Not when it was certain. Not when it was confirmed. When it was possible. They looked at the data and said, if this continues, I don't want to be here. And they left. Not because they knew. Because they didn't need to know. You're waiting for proof. Proof is expensive. Proof costs time you don't have. Let's run the numbers. In a grid-down scenario, cyber attack, infrastructure failure, doesn't matter. The timeline to chaos is 72 hours. First 24 hours, people stay calm because they expect it to come back on. They've seen outages before. This is just another one. Second 24 hours, stores stop functioning because payment systems are down. ATMs don't work. Gas stations can't pump fuel. People start to get nervous, but they're still mostly following social norms. Third 24 hours, food is running out. Pharmacies can't dispense medication. Hospitals are on backup generators that are running out of fuel. And now you have 3 million people who are scared, angry, and starting to make decisions based on desperation instead of logic. Where are you in that timeline? If you're waiting until hour 48 to decide whether to leave, you're already too late. The roads are packed. The gas stations are empty. Everyone who is slower than you is now in front of you. And everyone who is faster is already gone. This is the flaw. You think you'll outmaneuver the crowd. You won't. Because you're part of the crowd. You're just slower to admit it. Here's what the data shows. In every evacuation scenario, the window to leave safely is front-loaded. The first 20% of evacuees get out with zero complications. The next 30% face delays but make it out. The remaining 50% either don't leave or get trapped trying. You want to be in the first 20%. That means you move on incomplete information. You move when it's still possible that nothing happens. You accept the cost of being wrong in exchange for not being dead. Most of you won't do this. You'll wait. You'll tell yourself it's not that bad. You'll refresh the news. You'll check social media for confirmation. And while you're doing that, the window is closing. Not slowly, fast. Let me tell you about Syria. 2011. The collapse didn't start with war. It started with drought, crop failures, economic stress, political tension. And for 2 years, people told themselves it would stabilize. They stayed in the cities. They kept their jobs. They waited for normalcy to return. By the time the war started, the window to leave was already closed. Borders were shutting down. Routes were contested. And millions of people who could have left in 2011 or 2012 were now trapped in a conflict zone they didn't see coming. The ones who left early were called paranoid. The ones who stayed were called realistic. And the ones who stayed are the ones who didn't make it out. You don't get credit for being right if you're dead. You get credit for being early. So here's your decision tree. When do you move? Not when collapse is certain. When the probability crosses your threshold. And your threshold should be lower than you think. Because the cost of being wrong, leaving early for no reason, is temporary inconvenience. The cost of being late is everything. This is where most plans fail. They don't account for the emotional resistance to early action. They don't account for the fact that you'll talk yourself out of it. You'll look at your job, your routine, your house, and you'll think, I can't just leave. And that thought, that hesitation is the timer running out. Here's the real question. What signal are you waiting for? What piece of information will make you move? If you don't have an answer to that right now, you don't have a plan. You have a hope. And hope is not a survival strategy. The cascade is already running. You just don't see it yet. The systems are stressed. The buffers are thinning. The interdependencies are fragile, and when it breaks fast. You'll have hours, not days, and most of those hours will be spent in denial. The people who survive aren't the ones with the most resources. They're the ones who move first. They're the ones who understand that in collapse, speed beats strength, timing beats preparation, and decisiveness beats everything. So here's your protocol. Define your trigger. Define the signal that makes you move. Not the signal that confirms collapse. The signal that suggests collapse is possible. And when you see that signal, you move. No second guessing. No waiting for consensus. No checking to see what everyone else is doing. Because what everyone else is doing is dying slowly while they wait for certainty. You want to survive? Stop planning for the collapse you can see coming. Start planning for the collapse that's already here. The one hiding in the logistics, the one buried in the supply chains, the one waiting in the interdependencies that nobody's tracking. It's not coming. It's already running, and the only question that matters is whether you're ahead of it or behind it.